Welcome to Now UTOKing, which is a new series of short videos on how to define key terms in the UTOK system. Today, we are talking about the concepts of metacrises, and we'll also be alluding to the fifth joint point. The term metacrisis has been used a lot in this corner of the internet. I first heard it by Thomas Bjorkman. It's also been mentioned by Zach Stein, John Vervaeke, and Jordan Hall. Jonathan Rowson gave an excellent overview of it in Tasting the Pickle, where he delineated 10 different aspects of the meta crisis. Let's break this down for just a second. The word meta means beyond or above, and of course crises mean a number of acute scenarios. Meta crisis combines those and basically says there's a gigantic overarching complex set of crises that are interrelated and interconnecting. Jonathan Rowson lays out 10 of them, but we're going to be a little briefer here and contextualize them in terms of 4 major domains that together I'm going to call the digital identity problem. So the first domain can be thought of as the techno-environmental crisis. What's that? The techno-environmental crisis is the process by which in the Industrial Revolution, humanity generated the mechanisms to pull off of nature and transform it into a massive industrial technological complex. What this means is that we are transforming nature, operating in nature, to build it into a human system. In other words, turning all the stuff from nature into things like plastic and buildings and roads and carbon dioxide. The trouble here, of course, is that as the massive success of the Industrial Revolution transformed itself, it meant that we were putting increasing pressures on the planet. Our population exploded, our capacity to manipulate the planet's resources exploded, and that means massive depletion on top of the planet. So we get global climate change and local depletions in addition to massive extinctions, as we also get more and more dependent upon increasing our economic growth and consumerism. So it's the intersection of the economic capital growth, depleting the environment both globally and locally, and an engine system that's designed to accelerate that. It's a dangerous combination for sure. In addition, what we see is the massive proliferation of terrifying weapons, like, of course, the nuclear bombs that emerged in the middle of the 20th century. And now we're also seeing potentials for all sorts of dangerous biological weapons that potentially could be manifested themselves in any number of unregulated scenarios, creating all sorts of different kinds of catastrophic world threat. There's also a threat to our digital system that could be sabotaged. So what we see here is a techno-environmental system that's very vulnerable and on the trajectory to be more and more damaged. The second aspect is the digital globalization problem. What we see with the digital globalization problem is the world becoming increasingly more interconnected. And then as we built computers, the internet, artificial intelligence, we built our material technologies that actually then afforded us an information interface. This has been going on, evolving since writing, but now we have computational systems, of course, that are demonstrating in certain areas far greater powers than the human mind, at least in terms of raw calculation, data storage, and whatnot. And the internet is interconnecting our minds through things like Zoom and everything else in a social media network that is totally different. This opens us all sorts of possibilities that are great. And at the same time, those possibilities mean that the ways in which the old institutional structures emerged in the Industrial Revolution and generated sort of the modern arrangement are now potentially massively undermined and outdated. So part of the issue is how are we going to transform into the digital globalization era without undermining the underlying structure and causing collapse that way. The next problem is the meaning crisis. In the context of the emergence of modernity, coupled to a postmodern critique and problems like I've labeled like the Enlightenment gap, there has been no coherent knowledge system that grounds us in relation, affords a way to understand our natures and our place that everyone can plug into and afford us at least some shared sense of what is true and good. Instead, what we're seeing is a massive proliferation of a chaotic, fragmented pluralism, and that is infecting the capacity for us to coordinate our knowledge across us to understand what we need to be doing in this crucial time. And it's also leading to all sorts of different kinds of difficulties in fundamental ways of connecting with reality, I think we should see this in what's called the mental health crisis. There's lots of evidence that depression, anxiety, suicide, substance use, and a whole host of other psychological maladies are on the rise. This is especially true in our youth and a number of subpopulations in the United States, and actually also being demonstrated across the globe. More and more people are feeling alienated, nihilistic, not homed, unclear about what to do, and are developing more and more neurotic internalizing conditions and occasionally externalizing conditions in terms of mass shootings and other types of fundamental destructive breakdowns. So, what do we have on our hands? We have a digital globalization problem, we have a techno-environmental problem, a meaning crisis, and a mental health crisis. Together, I call these the digital identity problem. And what I mean by that is that on the digital side, we have the tech problem, the emergence of the digital, coupled with all the technologies, coupled with our need to reestablish a much healthier relationship with each other and the planet. And then we have the mental health and meaning identity problem. Who are we and how are we going to wisely move into the back half of the 21st century? UTOK offers the digital identity solution, especially in the form of the iQuad coin. The iQuad coin represents one, actually is one, and represents one, and it represents the human identity, coupling itself to a wisdom, philosophy, and appreciation of technology, nature, and the relational world. The digital identity solution that's envisioned is a kind of third attractor. In this space, we've heard a lot of individuals, like Daniel Schmachtenberger, talk about global civilization collapse and the tremendous risk factors we face as a function of all the interdependencies that are stacked and fragile, and if they start to fall, they can fall together like dominoes. That's the chaotic side that we may be facing when we see a fundamental breakdown. However, when the fundamental breakdown starts, what you're going to see is totalitarian governments trying to gain control, and people, when they're panicking, will be looking for those individuals who can afford the security through authority and dominance. This pushes us to another attractor state, a totalitarian state like 1984. And frankly, with the digital world, we can imagine now a kind of state control that we could have never seen before. If somebody gets their hands on the absolute ability to regulate the internet structures, we will have a massive totalitarian state. Those are two dangerous attractor states. A third attractor is something that we could move toward wisely, that we could incrementally move to cultivate wisdom, flourishing, sustainability, and other valued states of being. UTOK positions itself as a third attractor. It affords us a new way to think about knowledge systems, the human condition, and our ultimate collective values. It does this in particular through the tree of knowledge system and the iQuad coin with the garden in relation. When we look at the tree of knowledge system, we notice that there's an evolution of different forms of complex planes of existence. Life following matter, matter following life, culture following mind, and now we're seeing digital following culture. What the tree of knowledge suggests is this is a fifth joint point. The joint point from energy to matter, matter to life, life to mind, and mind to culture. Now culture to digital. The fifth joint point, as we're seeing with the meta crisis, is associated with all sorts of potential chaotic flux. The question is, how will we fly through it? Orienting ourselves through UTOK as a third attractor positions itself in relationship to the meta crisis and identifies it as a particular thread line to manage some of the deep logos problems in our knowledge systems and orient the kinds of processes that are associated with mental health and wise living. This needs to be one of the threads that will then connect with other broad solutions, perhaps things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, or other kinds of structures that enable the digital globalization and techno-environmental problems to be addressed. If we're successful at this, we'll create the digital identity solution through the fifth joint point and generate another complex adaptive plane of existence mediated by the digital that hopefully will be sustainable in a period of genuine human flourishing. UTOK is positioned to contribute to that. This brings us to the end of our series on Now UTOKing, and I hope you've enjoyed it.